Hello and welcome to Animatrix Animation Festival 2021, to our first masterclass with Nancy Denney-Phelps, acclaimed animation and film critic and writer and researcher. We're very happy to have her here to talk about the history of women in animation and some of the brightest stars of this of the animation history. That's wonderful, and I will turn over to Nancy, who is joining us from Ghent in Belgium.
Mhm. Thank you. And I'd like to thank the festival for inviting me to speak to you all about the unsung women heroes of animation. I was appalled to learn recently that although today women make up 65% of the students in animation schools, they hold a very significantly smaller role in the creation of animation industry. Only 23% to be exact. Most of the women in animation schools today will make only one independent film after graduation, join a production company for a short time, or go into teaching. Wait, before you say no, not me. Remember that for every Signe Bauman and Anita Keeley who make their own films, there's a multitude of talented women who have given up. It also seems strange to me that although we all know the Fleisher brothers and Walt Disney, and with just a few exceptions, the women who blazed animation trails, most women in the history are unknown. I'd like to introduce you to a few of the women who made it possible for you ladies in the audience to be sitting here today. The best known of the women, of course, is Lotte Ringener, the German director who pioneered silhouette animation. We should have a picture of her. Hmm. She is known for her feature film, The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, and she made more than 40 other films during her career. In 1933, Lillian Friedman Astor was hired by the Fleischer Brothers studio, and she became the first female studio animator to receive a screen credit for Pudgy and the Lost Kitten. That's a 1938 Betty Boop film. She was only credited with 6 out of the 11 films that she worked on at Fleischer Brothers Studio. Bianca Mahale was the first woman hired at Disney Studios' story department. She is credited with providing an entirely different perspective from the rest of the gag-oriented male story team. She came up with a touching original story about a baby elephant that is teased because of his looks, but whose long trunk saves the day when a fire threatens the girl he loves. Her creation of Elmer Elephant has become a Silly Symphonies classic. Sylvia Mobley Holland was the second woman hired by Disney Story Department and the first to be in charge of an all-male team. She led the story team for the Waltz of the Flowers fairy segment of Fantasia. Her male staff resented taking orders from a woman. Due to the misogyny of the period, several of her male team members transferred from working on the fairy sequence to another department. Even with the constant rotation of artists, Sylvia led her team to make one of Fantasia's most beautiful sequences. Retta Scott was the first woman animator to get a screen credit on a Disney studio film. While at art school in Los Angeles, Retta spent a great deal of her time at the zoo and became an expert on drawing animals. In 1938, she joined the story department working on Bambi, where she was assigned to animate scenes featuring the hunting dogs chasing Feline, Bambi's childhood friend and future mate. Scott's snarling dogs are legendary. She's quoted as saying, "I developed the hunting dogs into vicious, snarling beasts, running and scrambling, trying to climb the cliff and sliding back." When the men in the front office saw her powerful drawings, they thought they must have been drawn by a big, strong man, and were amazed to discover that they'd been drawn by a petite young woman. We're having comments from the audience, I see. Mary Ellen Butte was one of the first female experimental filmmakers. Her specialty was visual music. While working on her own, she made 14 short abstract musical films between 1934 and 1953. Unfortunately, most of her films are no longer available in good prints. That was not always true, though. During a 25-year period from 1934 to about 1959, the abstract films that she made played in regular movie theaters as the short before the first run features. That means that millions of people saw her work, many more than most other experimental animators ever get shown in theaters. Mary Blair's vibrant colors and stylized design set the standard for Disney films from 1943 to 1953. She worked on such films as Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan. An imaginative colorist and designer, she helped introduce a modernist style to the Disney studio. In the 1950s, she was commissioned to design large-scale, three-dimensional projects for Disney. And she also worked on the theme park attractions using animatronic characters, wall murals, and tile decor. Most memorable of these is It's a Small World attraction that is found in all but one of the Disney parks. Eunice Macaulay worked at the National Film Board of Canada for almost 20 years. She was in the art department as well as becoming a producer. In 1979, she became the first woman to win an Academy Award for a short animation in her own right as producer of Special Delivery. 1979. And the Oscars had been going since the 20s. Brenda Banks is thought to be the first female African American animator when she worked on Ralph Bakshi's Wizards in the 1970s. Brenda went on to animate on The Simpsons, Virtual Springfield, and as a character layout artist on The Simpsons Show. She also worked on Smurfs, King of the Hill, and was a key animator on Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, Brenda Banks seems to have completely disappeared, and no one has any knowledge of where she is now or why she stopped animating. These are just a few of the women who participated in the history and development of the art of animation, and any one of them would be worthy of a program themselves. Excuse me. However, the woman I want to spotlight today is Joy Batchelor, one of the most successful women in British animation, and half of the team of the British animation studio Howlis and Batchelor. I believe we have a picture of Joy. Okay. In an era where women in all fields were undervalued, underpaid, and relegated to the lower grade jobs, it was not surprising that publicly the lion's share of the credit for the success of Howlis and Batchelor has gone to John Howlis. But Joy's contribution to Howlis and Batchelor and British animation were immense. She worked on over 100 films in her long career as an animator, scriptwriter, designer, storyboarder, and/or director. Although her contributions often went uncredited on the screen, Joy's style and aesthetic sense are stamped on every film she worked on at Howlis and Batchelor Studio. Joy was born on May 12, 1914, in a small terrace house in Watford, then a market town about 20 miles north of London. Her father was a lithographic draftsman who lacked any ambition. He even refused to accept a management position, which left the family finances in a very precarious state. Her love of drawing began at an early age, earning her a place at the Watford School of Art. Despite offers for further study upon graduation, Joy had to find a job to help support her family. Her first job was painting ornaments on an assembly line. Always one to speak her mind, Joy spoke out about the poor working conditions and was promptly fired. Looking for a job in London, She was offered a place at a new animation studio which was being set up by Australian cartoonist Dennis Connolly. He'd recently returned to England from Australia. She was initially hired in 1934 as an in-betweener, but once again she asserted herself and spoke out about the poor quality of the work, and this time she was rewarded with a swift promotion to key animator. The studio lasted barely 3 years, but it gave Joy her first taste of big city life and independence. Even more important, she'd been bitten by the animation bug, and there was no looking back. Spotting a small ad in a new animation for spotting a small ad for a new animation studio, which was looking for experienced animators, she later said that her first thought was, "Ah, this is your lucky day, Joy." The prospective employer was Janis Halas, who had recently arrived from his native Hungary to be creative head of British Colour Cartoon Films Limited. He was also beginning to be known by his anglicized name of John Hallis. The film she was hired to work on was Music Man. Let's watch Music Man.
Music man, oh music man, play for me as sweetly as you can. Don't play hot and thanks a lot, Mr. Music Man. Music man, oh music man, play to me, for I'm a music fan. Sweet and low, please don't say no, Mr. Music Man. Give me a tune upon your violin, oh I don't want to dance. It's just a sentimental mood I'm in. I'm longing for romance. Music man, oh music man, play for me as sweetly as you can. Don't play hot and thanks a lot, Mr. Music Man.
I can't see the films. I can't see the film. I can't see the films, so you have to cue me when they're over.
Okay, so the Nancy, the video is over. The Music Man is
Thank
over.
you. Joy later recalled that first momentous meeting with John, quote, in addition to being an experienced animator, I was not bad at exchanging looks, and this one was riveting. But work came first, as it has done ever since between us. Shortly before they completed the film, they became a couple. After the film was completed, Joy was laid off and looking for work until John offered her a job on another film, this time in Budapest. She spoke almost no Hungarian and was traveling with a man who was not only her employer, but her lover. John's grasp of English was minimal, and Joy later wrote, quote, we conversed through the medium of pencil and paper, sighs and gestures, and some form of ESP. It worked pretty well, end quote. In Budapest, Joy began to become involved with the script and other pre-production roles for the first time. Unfortunately, the money for the project ran out, and Hungary's increasing closeness to Nazi Germany meant that they, and especially John, who was Jewish, felt that they had to return to London. They were so broke that they had to borrow money for tickets, but they were lucky enough to get one of the last trains back to London. They traveled third class on wooden benches. From 1937 until 1941, they ran a small graphic design studio doing freelance work. Once again, luck enabled the pair to return to animation. The J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency was located around the corner from the studio where Alexander McKendrick was writing advertisements and scripts and designing cinema publicity films, including a successful series of Horlick advertisements animated by George Pal in Holland. John had begun his animation career with Pal back in Budapest, and Pal introduced the pair to Thompson before immigrating to Hollywood. When the war broke out, paper was in short supply, and there was not much space in newspapers for the advertisements, but film stock was not rationed, so cinema studios no longer available. It was logical to utilize them. With George Pal's studio no longer available, it was logical to utilize the film marketing expertise of Joy and John. In order to be paid, they had to become a company, so Hallis and Batchelor Cartoon Films was established in 1940. They were also married the same year. A perfect example of their commercial work at the time is the 1946 Train Trouble commercials for Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Let's watch Train Time.
I go singing down the track, the railway line keeps singing back, and as I travel on my way, this is what it seems to say. Tiddly-um, clear the way, tap, 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 toodalay. Tiddly-um, toodaloo, we're coming through. Right on the dot. We're coming through. Land sakes, I sure hope Mr. Squirrel gets to the switches in time this morning.
Emily, am I never to get my breakfast? Huh?
I've only one pair of hands, dear.
There, see? What about the switches? Here come the trains. And no breakfast.
Going to be late. You're 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 going to be late. You should be late. You should be late. You should be late. You should be late.
I beg your pardon.
That sure was a close one, Mr. Squirrel.
Thanks. I know, Mr. Bear. It's my breakfast. It's never ready. What am I supposed to do, go without?
I don't know, Mr. Squirrel. But it seems to me that one of these mornings there'll be a little, accident maybe.
Hey, look. These ain't my groceries. Mr. Bear. Mr. Bear.
As I go singing down the track. Diddly-um, do-do-do. Bum, 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 bum. Diddly-um, bum, bum, bum. Da-da-dum-ba-dum. There she goes. 5 minutes early, too. 5 minutes early? The switches! Mr. Squirrel, quick! The switches! The train! gosh, it's all right.
Good morning, Mr. Bear. Nice day?
But I thought you'd still be at breakfast.
Breakfast? What a breakfast. Mr. Bear, you solved my life's problem. You brought the wrong groceries.
Huh?
Look, Kellogg's cornflakes. It's called the 30-second breakfast because it only takes 30 seconds to serve. Taste it.
Thank you. As a freelancer, Joy had done some work for Shell Oil, working with their publicity director, John Beddington. In 1941, Beddington was appointed head of the Ministry of Information Film Division, and Joy said that he supplied them with a steady flow of work throughout the war years. The first films, such as Dustbin Parade, 1941, and Filling the Gap in 1942, were made under the auspices of the Realistic Film Unit. The studio quickly developed a successful style of blending anthropomorphic objects and cartoon styles into more realistic airbrush textures and backgrounds. Let's watch Dustbin Parade.
That's no way to treat us. In wartime, too. It's high time we did something about this.
Why don't you all join up? I've had my calling up papers. Going in the Navy. Probably be posted to a destroyer.
Join up? Where?
Right over there. At the recruiting center.
But will they take us?
Go on. They're looking for fellows like you.
Thanks, mister.
Well, what do you want to be?
We want to be a shell.
And a shell you shall be.
It's all right. We've just got to wait for the next lot of salvage. Hello, what's this? Great offensive. All out for victory. All out for victory! Wait here, I'll be back. Come on, boys! Right over the target. Here we go, boys. Yippee!
We're finished. You can continue.
Thank you. The fact that Hallison Bachelor initially had to work through another studio may have been due to John's enemy alien status. Most likely, his marriage to Joy saved him from internment in the Isle of Man, where many other immigrants were forced to go. By 1943, they were finally entrusted to handle the Ministry of Information films on their own, and the studio was suddenly very busy. They made some 70 films during the war, many of them short, 90-second public information inserts in cinemas, for newsreels, and about such things as salvaging, allotment management, fuel economy, and similar exciting subjects. They also produced a series of anti-Nazi propaganda films in Arabic, a film warning soldiers of the dangers of foot rot, venereal disease, and other dangers of the ongoing war in Asia, and a 7-part series on ship handling, which was filmed in Technicolor, their first adventure into Technicolor, really, as a studio. Their staff had now grown to between 15 and 20 people, mostly women. The studio's wartime efforts were rewarded in post-war period by more government commissions, including a 7-part series designed to commemorate many of the groundbreaking socialist policies of the new labor regime. The biggest difference from the wartime work, however, was that Joy had to work more from home after the birth of their daughter Vivian in 1945. Quote, Hallison Bachelor was no longer 50-50, she wrote. I was, as a witty friend remarked, literally left holding the baby. John was holding the studio together, and my life was never the same again, end quote. Becoming a mother may have changed the working pattern in their relationship, but Joy continued to focus on the company from home. There were letters giving instructions to the company from Joy as she wrote on the day of Vivian's birth. During this period, Joy concentrated more on the pre-production stages like scripts and storyboards, which could be done at home. While she did continue to work at the studio sometimes, to direct animators and other creatives, her presence was almost more fleeting and elusive than John's in people's memories. The distinction that Joy later put on the divide was that John became the main contact point and producer of the company because it involved traveling and socializing. He became the primary figure associated with the company and increasingly the British animation industry as a whole. He was the face people saw, and he was a good storyteller, politician, and showman as well. This was also a period when the studio's first art film was released, the 10-minute abstract visual Magic Canvas. Having Having creating the images and story, Joy is uncredited on the film, which is a shame because this is just the type of production that would have brought more critical acclaim to the studio than the sponsored work and more attention to Joy as an animator. Let's watch some of Magic Canvas. Thank you. In 1949, their son Paul was born. On what became the studio's best-known work, Animal Farm, the first British feature-length animated film made in 1954, Joy is given screen credit as a designer, scriptwriter, character designer, storyboarder, and director, at last receiving the on-screen credit that she'd been deserving of all along. John and Joy jumped wholeheartedly into the adventure, and it was a project for which they both shared a great passion. Joy's contribution to the scripting, development, and characterization of the film was immense, particularly in the early stages when she primarily worked at home. Joy tried to work around the needs of the children, insisting on family breakfasts together and spending 2 hours every evening with the children for tea, stories, and putting them to bed. She would make up the work hours late at night and on weekends. Let's see a clip from Animal Farm.
To the world we all know, which may or may not be the best world possible, once again springtime had come. But all the magic of spring was not enough to conceal the misery of Manor Farm. Once thriving and fruitful, the farm and its owner, Mr. Jones, had fallen on evil days. Beset by problems of his own making, Mr. Jones had turned to drink. And for his misery, he had found poor company. On the evening our story begins, it was later than usual when Mr. Jones came home from his drinking to make his rounds.
Damned old hens. Good for nothing beasts. Eat their heads off.
Thank you. It was where the work stepped into the rapidly expanding studio and was delegated to a growing number of staff that Joy probably couldn't make the contribution to Animal Farm that she wanted to and felt very left out. Photographs of the film in production often show John at the heart of the discussions, whereas Joy's presence survives more in the many script drafts, covered in her handwriting with annotations, and in correspondence with the film's backers. When interviewed later in life, Joy stated that this was the film that she enjoyed working on the most. Joy's daughter, Vivian Hallis, remembers that after the release of Animal Farm, Joy was hailed as the woman Disney, and there were journalists all over the studio and all over the house taking photos for the magazines. Joy thought all of this was fairly patronizing, as the press seemed to take more interest in her as a homemaker than a filmmaker. After the success of Animal Farm, the company was perfectly positioned to take advantage of the arrival of commercial television in Britain, making over 200 commercials in 1956 alone. At the same time, they were picking up commission after commission from large companies. Despite the success of it here, that's when the divide really seemed to set in between Joy and John. The fact that the partnership was no longer 50-50 did not mean that she was doing less work. In fact, Joy was taking on a heavier burden in the relationship. She still put in her 50% of efforts towards the company, but on top of that, she took on the role of being a mother with much more commitment than John seemed to be giving to being a father. Aside from Animal Farm, Hallis and Batchelor's reputation is largely based on the independent short films that they made for themselves rather than the commissioned films. John does appear to be the driving force behind these work, and Joy's role in these films is harder to pick out. She stated that she initially manned the History of the Cinema project in 1957, a 10-minute satire on the growth of film and television. But the final credits list John alone as director and producer, and he shares script and design credits with two other men. Joy is not credited anywhere. She has a script credit on Automania 20,000, the first British animation to gain an Oscar nomination, but no credit for design, production, or direction. Let's see some of Anatomia.
Scientists have gone from strength to strength during the past decade. Science has brought mankind new and undreamt of standards of living. The development of the science of electro-hydromagnetics has given us limitless cheap power. They have been able to harvest the great hidden wealth of the seas. From coal and petroleum, they have developed the manufacture of appetizing and nourishing foods. We have freedom from want and from cooking. The same source of power applied to mass production has resulted in an inexhaustible flood of consumer goods and a worldwide affluent society. This has created certain problems. In the more densely populated areas of our planet, people have been confined to their cars for over 5 years. The younger children cannot remember the time when it was possible to move around in cars. In those days, everyone wanted to go faster than the next person. There was also a desire to own bigger cars. This wish on the part of the public was faithfully served by designers, scientists, manufacturers, salesmen, and psychologists. The result? The launching of the 40-foot supercar. The trend was immediately adopted all over the world. Encouraged by the success of long cars, a most inspired idea was brought into operation. A car for every occasion. A car for Sunday. A car for dating. A car for retired admirals. The campaign culminated in the automatic baby carriage. These baby cars were guided by the mother by remote control. Many childless couples rush to have 2 or 3 cars ready in advance.
Thank you. The start of the 1960s saw a division from the norm at Hallison Bachelor Productions, where their second feature, one of their very few live-action films, The Monster of Highgate Ponds, went into production. Funded by the Children's Film Foundation, the film was based on a story that Joy wrote. She also designed the monster, although she did not direct the film. Joy was fairly dismissive about the project, and even the stop-motion sequences of the monster in the film did not offer her the same rewards as drawn animation. She later wrote of John and the company, quote, "By the end of the 1950s, our interests in films began to diverge. The process continued through the 1960s with a succession of boring film subjects that fell to my lot and left me bored, which didn't improve the films." End quote. The realization that she lacked experience and skill in all the political, business, and social games that go with filmmaking resulted in long, tedious illnesses and a great creative loss on Joy's part. The fact that John's reputation was going from strength to strength domestically and then internationally in the 1960s added to Joy's sense of neglect. John's first published writing on animation in English was a joint essay with Joy for the Penguin Film Review in the 1940s, but his subsequent books on animation were all undertaken with a series of different writers and never again with his wife and business partner. Strains on their relationship led to distractions outside of the home for both of them. The medications that went along with the succession of illnesses that plagued Joy throughout this period did not mix well with the over-reliance on drink as a stress reliever and social lubricant. While John was directing films for mass audiences such as Hamilton the Musical Elephant in 1961 and Automania 20,000 in 1963, as well as dealing with children's television series such as Foo-Foo, Joy was left directing commissioned films on the Commonwealth and its Colombo Plan, and producing a film called Sputum. She increasingly found that she could get more pleasure from taking time off of animation to work in her garden. In the early 1960s, Hallison Batchelor established an offshoot company, the Educational Film Center, which, was the name suggested, specialized in films for classrooms and educational institutions. 10 years on, in 1955, the golden age of British animation production, which had been kick-started by the arrival of commercial television, was beginning to wane. The impetus of Hallison Batchelor as a company was also beginning to wane, along with Joy's enthusiasm. The new opportunity was thought to be American television cartoons. John and Joy decided that to keep the business running required new investment, and they sold the majority of the company to Thai Tea Television, keeping a 20% investment for themselves. Their influence in the company, which still carried their name, fell rapidly. And what Joy referred to as the new empire of the company rejected and even maligned the style of their past work in order to promote the new house brand. The situation came to a head in 1972 when John and Joy felt that they were forced to release their remaining shares under false pretenses. Much of the stressful fallout from the situation fell to Joy to deal with because John was away at a convention of the International Council of Graphic Design Association. She also began to suffer from severe arthritis in her hands. Joy continued to work using other artists to draw and complete the storyboards that she could no longer produce to her satisfaction. In 1974, Joy almost completely retired from filmmaking, but she did begin to teach at the London International Film School, which she thoroughly enjoyed. She continued teaching there for many years. In 2014, the animation world celebrated the centenary of Norman McLaren, an event well worth celebrating. But 2014 was also the 100th anniversary of the birth of Joy Batchelor, and sadly, it passed almost unnoticed. To commemorate the event, Joy's daughter, Vivian Hallis, made a short film tribute to her mother entitled Ode to Joy. Let's watch Ode to Joy, please.
Joy Batchelor was one half of the celebrated animation team Hallison Batchelor, responsible for over 40 years of groundbreaking animated films. Despite being one of animation's most important figures, today she is one of its unsung heroines. This film is a short introduction to her work. From the outset, Joy's creative ambitions were always tempered by reality and the need to earn a living. Just before World War II, when animation work was scarce, Joy drew illustrations for cookery books, magazines such as Harper's and Vogue, and even gossip pages in the tabloids. But her visual sensibility and fluidity of line is evident in all her work. The Hallison Batchelor studio is usually thought never to have had a house style, but it is clear, if one compares the early films with her illustrations, that Joy's was the house style. Never more apparent than in these post-war public information films. As a commercial artist, her role was to translate a client's brief into an engaging story in order to persuade, sell, or entertain. She loved to explain complicated ideas and even used quite experimental techniques to do so. She also excelled in managing the work of others, with the unfortunate result that she is uncredited on many of the later shorts. However, on Animal Farm, she is credited with script writing, direction, production and design. And on Rudigore, her style and sensibility is visible in every frame.
Oh, Sir Belay, I beseech you.
That Joy always worked to a brief meant that her films often reflected the attitudes of the client and society as a whole, rather than her own.
I've only one pair of hands, dear.
This is never more apparent than in her portrayal of women. But even under these circumstances, she was able to include humorous and even subversive flourishes of her own. Perhaps this should be her legacy. Her example that even within a tight commercial brief and without proper credit, it is still possible to achieve great artistry. Her recognition is long overdue.
What? You ready? Okay. Joy's story is not unlike that of many other women in the animation industry who are expected to juggle long hours of work for less pay or recognition with taking care of a family. And unfortunately, it's still far too true today. Now it is up to the next generation of women in the animation industry to change that. Go out there, work hard, and don't settle for anything less than equality in opportunities for pay and recognition. I'd like to thank Vivian Hallis, Joy's daughter, for giving me complete access to the Hallis and Batchelor archives and allowing me to present this wonderful work to you. Thank you.
So much useful information about all these wonderful female filmmakers that otherwise there's very little to know about them. Actually, it's interesting that it was really good to listen to you and hear about Joy Batchelor, because I actually have this latest release from Hallis and Batchelor, which was released in 2015, and actually it has a lot of extras, but I have to say all of them are pretty much about John Hallis. And also, if you look at the interviews there, I think it's very difficult to find any interview from Joy Batchelor. It's all John Hallis if you look at anything to do with their production. But so yeah, thank you, and I think it makes it much more important in that sense that you can sort of like balance the scale a little bit in terms of Hallis and Batchelor. And I think yeah, that's quite interesting, because this is actually 2015, and I have actually the Blu-ray. They're all restored. It's a wonderful collection, but it's like 10%, and Ode to Joy is the only extra related to Joy Batchelor in that thing. There's about 2 hours of extras, and it's all about John Hallis and his career and his work. And,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that picture from Life magazine with Joy working there at her desk with the 2 children underneath her says it all.
Mm.
I mean, that's how she was portrayed to the world, as the little woman at home. And they actually wanted to, they came up with this great idea, the photographer for Life magazine, of a picture of her drawing with one hand and washing dishes with the other. And she put her foot down at that and said, "No, that is not happening."
Yeah, that's true, and it actually is interesting because John and the fact that it's every BBC program you watch is just John Hallis, and interesting that he was originally Hungarian, and he came in as a foreigner, and somehow he was so much more important than Joy Batchelor, who originally is British. So it's yeah, that is kind of strange, and yeah, and kind of unequal. I mean, I'm glad we sort of like you're fixing this problem finally.
Yeah, but look at all the other women I talked about in the beginning too. Most of those are not well-known names.
Mm.
I mean, in the animation community, people know who they are, but outside of the animation community, I don't think anyone knows who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from the older ones, I mean, the only ones I actually knew was just Mary Blair, and I think Mary Blair was because she was such a famous illustrator in Britain before she ever went to work for Disney. And that's sort of the stuff that was in like Britain, and I think the documentaries and all the information that they distributed from Britain, that kind of changed the Disney perspective. And I remember like that finally I saw like on some Disney Blu-ray, I think, I'm not sure, I think it was maybe on Peter Pan or something like that, that they finally, like in 2000 something, made actually like a short American documentary about Mary Blair. And I think that was one of the first ones. I think before that, all the material and all the publications from about Mary Blair, about her books and like everything that she illustrated, everything came from Britain. That was, I think, there was nothing in America, although she worked for Disney for years. Yeah.
But people like Retta Scott, I mean, you never really realized the wonderful work she did.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. And the other one is Lotte Reiniger, and I think also with Lotte is that everything I know about Lotte Reiniger and all the sort of Blu-ray and DVD releases I've seen, they're all from BFI, British Film Institute.
There's actually a museum in Germany in her hometown that's devoted to her.
Uh-huh. Yes, of course, and I think the other one is in Germany, because I haven't seen the German museums and I haven't been there, but generally, like I'm thinking internationally also, and I think with her is the same thing that we keep here. Is I think one of the reasons that she was kind of discredited, at least as far as the Americans are concerned, is because of this Disney's claim that they always kept saying. That Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, made in 1937, was the first animated feature, and they always wanted to kind of emphasize and claim that sort of first, which obviously wasn't true, because Lotte Reiniger did she did The Adventures of Prince Ahmed in 1926, I think, right?
Yeah.
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 And they always kind of wanted to deny that, and because of that, I think there is still, I don't think there's any American release of Lotte Reiniger, of any of her work. As far as I know, everything is just from Britain. It's all from British Film Institute.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, I mean, just shows how powerful Disney is. And I have to want to ask also, because I remember I read this article finally about these women who were working for Disney. That there was nothing mentioned about them and about the salary and about the fact that Walt Disney was specifically saying that if you're a female, you're not good enough for animating and being a supervising animator, that's a man's job. If you're a woman, you have to do the coloring, and I think at best they had something like 120 women working for
Hundreds of women doing the ink and paint.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was that was interesting. That basically that was specifically requested by Disney, sort of categorizing them. I think that was interesting. I don't know if you had anything to do with that article. I can't remember who wrote that, but I think that was really interesting.
Well, there's actually a letter in existence that was sent to a woman in Arkansas, a young girl who wanted to apply as an animator for the Disney Animation School, because they had their in-house training. And she got back a letter saying that no need to apply, only women can paint, ink and paint, and we already have more than enough women. So you have to apply by coming out to Hollywood with your portfolio, but don't bother. And even when they moved into the new Disney studio, up on the top roof, there was a club. And this went on, I think, until the 1950s. There was a club up there, and it was exclusively for the male animators.
Wow. Yeah, because I mean, in America, I suppose if you went to buses and trams, they were also for colored people. There was a separate segregated area. So I think that we're kind of used to that at that point. Yeah, fine. I mean, if you segregate other people, other races, why not women as well? So yeah, it seems shocking to us, but yeah. But thank you, and then I'm sort of. I don't want to talk. I could talk about this for ages, and I'm sure you.
I know. So could I.
Yeah, let's start with a few comments and questions that we have received. first one I think is interesting. We when you were speaking earlier, there's a person called Susanna Viljama, and she has apparently found Brenda Banks's information about Brenda Banks, because I think in your presentation there was no birth and death date, and in here it says Brenda Banks lived from 1948 till 2020. So apparently one of our viewers knows that by the name of Susanna Viljama.
Great, great. I'd love her to send me any information she has about Brenda, because I've gotten conflicting reports, and also there were two women named Brenda Banks working in the industry.
Okay, yeah, that might be the problem. Yeah, I actually I don't. There's no more explanation there, but it's yeah, it just says born in 1948 and died in 2020. So that would have been last year. Yeah.
Well, that's
Could be.
it could be, but because I wasn't able to find out anything,
Mm.
and actually I talked to a couple of people who had worked with her who didn't know what happened to her either.
So it might be possible that this information is from the other Brenda Banks, maybe.
Possibly, but I'm going to start digging more and find.
Yeah, because
see
I
what
don't know anything. You should yeah, I could probably or like ask her to email you, and then you can figure this out, because I don't, unless she sends some more information right now. Yeah, because I also I don't. Okay. Uh, Okay, Susanna is saying that I just found the info from Wikipedia, checked it since the lifespan was just question marks. Yeah, because the lifespan had actually question marks there, and but she's, yeah, apparently in Wikipedia is this information. So yeah,
more questions.
more questions. Yeah, more questions. Yeah, so where did they get that stuff? But I mean, they update Wikipedia quite often, so maybe somebody's found some interesting information and put it in there. I don't know.
Okay,
I have to
thank you.
figure this out. Oh yeah, and then also we have the other thing is that I think anything we mention here, we have to wait about 30 seconds, because there's a delay in the video. So whatever we say, viewers hear in about 30 seconds. Actually, Susanna was really quick to respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That was mentioned before, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, I have another whole presentation that talks about present day situation of women in animation in the industry, and goes into the whole situation with Brenda Chapman and Frozen, which is a really interesting, very sad chapter in animation history.
Oh, you mean the Disney director who did Brave? Like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Brenda Chapman. She worked on several Disney films in the 80s and 90s, and then she I'm not sure. Was it Brave was the first one that she directed, right?
Well, she'd worked on other films before, but it was the first one that she was supposed to be directing. You know, she was taken off of it in the middle of the film,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is an interesting story. And it's especially a sad story because that was a story that she made up for her daughter. But no matter who wrote it or what, if you are working at the studio, anything you produce, even on your own free time, belongs to the studio.
Yeah, that's typical of Disney. I think they did that also with Glenn Keane with some other smaller projects as well. They've
Yeah.
done a lot of those. I mean, yeah, Disney is kind of notorious for doing that for so many companies. Well, and Tim Burton as well. I'm thinking like he did a lot of work in the 80s. They did some work on the 80s. Of course, that was different because they didn't take anything from him, and then sort of they kicked him out and hired some other people. Of course, they have tons of those, of course, but yeah, it was interesting. But because it's Brenda Chapman, she's quite famous, and this is quite recent. Yeah, this happened
Oh,
like
yeah.
probably 10 years ago, or 10, 15 years ago. Actually.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Disney is his own thing, of course. Unfortunately. Yeah, did they even acknowledge the letters, the ones that you mentioned about the ink and paint? I think probably not.
Yeah. It's it's a real lesson. If you're going to work in the industry, make sure that anything you produce that you don't want them to have their hands on, you you know get it copywritten, protected.
Mm. Yeah, it is a tricky thing. I want to ask you about Lotte Reiniger's work because everything that I have seen has been like British Film Institute releases. I think they've done lots of all of the restoration of these adventures of Prince Ahmed, and a lot of the shorts also came out of Britain as a sort of like a digital release of like DVD or Blu-ray. Do you know if is that basically I don't know, is are Germans happy with it, or is that they have no choice about that? That if basically whatever Lotte Reiniger has done is just belongs to BFI, and then is there other people releasing work from her, and or how do you feel about that? Do you think like BFI has kind of
Well,
publicized
you
her
know,
work well enough or not? Yeah.
it's the same old story. You know, you sell your soul to the devil, and they take every part of you. But the one good thing about it is they have restored a lot of the pieces which needed some work on them. I mean, the new print of Prince Ahmed is beautiful.
Yes. And what was the restoration done also in Britain? Because sometimes it's not; it's just released in like
Well, they farm it out.
mm,
They pay for it though
mm.
because they own it.
Yeah, because I know this in Germany they use that for a lot of the silent films because a lot of the German silent films they've been released in Britain, but all of the
Yeah.
restoration is mostly done by this Murnau Foundation, and then there's the Munich Film Museum. They do a lot of work, but then normally if I buy the Blu-ray and I want it, I need to buy the British one because the British somehow like release it first, although they haven't done the work. So I was thinking that if that's the case with Veterani as well.
Yeah,
But,
it's like uh, Vivian has put together this foundation to preserve the Hallis and Batchelor films, and luckily they never sold the films to other people, so they're there in the archives.
okay. Yeah, and it's yeah. Is that for no? They have their own system. Like it's not BFI. Yeah, it's
It's uh, actually Vivian's trying to find a good place for all of it to go, and she's still in the process of cataloging and going through things. And I mean, it takes that many years of some two people's lives, and yeah, it's not an easy process.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, and then it's interesting that actually, like, I don't think BBC has done much about it. I think those Blu-rays and stuff they all come from Network. Also, Animal Farm. I know I have them on Blu-ray. They're all from this Network, which is like a
Yeah.
British publisher, but I don't know anything more about them really. Okay, and we have one more comment, or is it a question? Automania. Susanna William says, Automania 2000 was funny considering it featured very conservative gender roles even in the future, despite having women as animators.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Could you
I'm going to
repeat?
read it again. I think it's a comment. Automania 2000 was funny considering it featured very conservative gender roles, even in the future, despite having women as animators.
Yes, that's really true. And that film is really interesting because for its time in Britain, it was definitely out of character. And of course, it got great success because it was the first film nominated for an Oscar from Britain.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an interesting film, but yeah, it's also very similar to some of the films that they did in Soviet Union in the '60s, like Fyodor Ketruk. And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It looks like things that were coming out of Hollywood during that time.
yeah, that's true.
I
Okay.
like the film a lot, though. I think it's very clever.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's actually it's sort of in some sort of the pollution and these other traffic issues that we seem to have in the world nowadays. I think it was very progressive and it was kind of commenting on those already in the so early. So I think in that sense, I remember that
Yeah.
that was quite interesting for me when I saw it like what maybe 10 years ago or something the first time. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for like talking to us. And I have to say that we have about 2 or 3 minutes left anymore for our sort of masterclass. So if you have any final words or anything, but I mean, it was wonderful to talk to you, and it was really wonderful.
I really enjoyed it, and I would love sometime to visit your festival in person because I'm very impressed from what I saw on the website with what you're doing. Approximately how many people do you have tuning in every day?
Let me see. I can actually check this. How many people do we have now? Sorry, for this lecture, there was about 10 people right now. I mean, on the chat and kind of live streaming. So yeah, it wasn't more than that, unfortunately. But I think a lot of people will watch this later because it will be like recorded. But I think also the time is a little bit early, and we're on Thursday, so maybe that kind of has diminished the viewers.
How do you feel it is running an online festival as opposed to a live one?
Well, I think in some ways, I think the fact that we can sort of do these online interviews and everything, I think in that sense is quite is much easier. But I think generally otherwise, in the fact that we actually don't have a screening in cinema, I think it doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't feel so good because I think it's just so much fun to just run to the cinema and then you see everything on a giant screen. And we had like a couple of really good cinemas in here. So yeah, it has its upsides and downsides, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. This is the first time I've given this talk without actually being able to see the films myself. Although I can see them in my head because I've seen them so many times, but that was strange to have to wait until you cued me.
Yeah, it's true because this was actually much more complicated than I thought as well. Because it's very strange because I didn't get the sound and you didn't get the video.
Yeah,
that's how it went, and it was like I wasn't hearing them. I was seeing them, I couldn't hear them. So yeah, that's the thing. When you go have three ways, we have like two. We have basically we have 3 or 4 computers and a couple of cameras hooked up to this, and it's basically like a 3-way connection. It gets quite complicated. I didn't even think.
Yeah. You'll have to go back and watch the films so you can hear them with the sound because some of them have. I mean, like I love the song in Music Man.
No, that's true. And actually, I have seen many of them. I have this collection of Allison Bachelor, and I think at least half of these films that you showed, I've seen them. Yeah, they're quite good. But of course, worth going back to because it's been a few years. But thank you, Nasib. I hope we can do this again, and it was certainly wonderful to have you with us. So we hope we can have you back next year, hopefully with a real actual festival where you can physically be here and enjoy everything in Helsinki and the weather and no sunlight almost 24 hours a day. So that would be wonderful. Okay.
Thank you so much to all of you for inviting me, even though I'm in my living room. I'm there.
Looks great. You have a cinema as well, apparently. So that's great. You kind of made the cinema virtually. So that's wonderful. Okay.
Well.
Thank you, and have a nice spring, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.